Hi, this is Jim,
And Ralph.
and we welcome you to Psychology Takeaway, the podcast where we look at new things in psychology or old things that might be relevant today and try to make them relevant to you.
And to us.
Hi, Ralph. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well, Jim. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, except I seem to have a bit of a snarfly nose. I think there's a lot of stuff going on in the air out there.
Yeah, the fall season where all of the things that got us in the spring because they were pollinating now get us in the fall because they're dying off and leaving their little trickles of whatever's in the air.
Whatever's in the air. Well, whatever's in the air is kind of interesting. This has been an interesting week for a topic that we've been planning, and that is the topic of autism. Well, autism has definitely been in the air this week, and we have an autism expert with us.
We do, and perhaps, Jim, you should be the one to introduce our autism expert because she's closely associated with you.
Okay, this is my daughter, Bridget Eagleson, and she is a social worker and has been specifically trained in the area of autism. Welcome to Psychology Takeaway, Bridget.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Okay. Well, when I say that autism has been in the air, we've had some announcements this week from the president and his health council about autism and the causes of autism and the potential cures for autism. Let's see. Cause, Tylenol, treatment, vitamin B9, and it's an awful disorder. Well, I would agree with it being an awful disorder, but Tylenol and B9?
Yeah, there definitely has been some very interesting things proposed, and I'd like to go through some of those things and look at the validity of them.
Okay, go for it.
So I'm very concerned about some of the maybe misinformation as an autistic adult myself, and also ADHD, and some of the conflation between these things, as well as being a licensed MSW, working with a lot of trauma therapy and things is my background. And a lot of the misinformation, I think, is contributing to further traumatizing the neurodivergent community.
Okay, so we have a neurodivergent community, and you've just trekked out a whole lot of different labels for yourself, and we can go into those later on, but what exactly is an autism spectrum disorder?
Well, if we look at the current criteria for diagnosis in the DSM-5, it's defined as having persistent deficits in social communication and social interaction, as well as having restricted patterns of behavior or repetitive patterns of behavior, which can also be seen as some sensory differences.
Okay. Now, as far as I know, the term was first used by Bleuler in 1911 to describe some characteristics of schizophrenic adults, like relationship problems or inability to focus or some stereotypical behavior. Then Leo Kanner comes along in the 1940s and talks about early infantile autism, right?
Yes, so for a long time, individuals with autistic characteristics were actually typically misdiagnosed with schizophrenia, especially early childhood onset schizophrenia. The first actual autism diagnosis that was known is in 1943, which is important because that ties in with the president's recent announcement about Tylenol being the cause of autism, because Tylenol was not available on the market until 1955.
So, if it's not Tylenol, it's going to be something else, right?
And yeah, so there's also a lot of talk about vaccines, right? And whether or not that could be a cause of autism. People are particularly typically concerned about some of the more modern vaccines, including the ones that are more combined, like the MMR vaccine.
Yeah, well, Wakefield, and we have a link to his study in, 1993, said that vaccines, particularly the MMR vaccines, were definitely the causes of autism, right?
Yes, though he
And
later retracted that research and
uh,
said that essentially that he made it up.
yeah, well, I think
And
retracted is one thing.
and the other thing is he was so castigated that he was removed from the medical list, which basically means he was defrocked and couldn't call himself a doctor anymore.
Correct. Yeah. So that's exactly what happened. But
And just for some, as we're talking about dates here too, the MMR vaccine was not available until the 1960s, so about
Okay.
20 years after the first diagnosis of autism.
Mm-hmm. And you know, Ralph and I don't know about you, but we've all been vaccinated against mumps, measles, rubella. Maybe not the MMR stuff, but hey,
Uh,
we don't have any autistic kids in the family.
Not that we know of.
We have some strange kids.
Yeah, well, we know that too. Now,
Strange kids, they catch it from their parents, don't they, Ralph?
yeah, here's a question for you, Bridget, because you just mentioned something that I was not aware of, and that is um, I always have used the term high functioning autistic person with the label Asperger's. And you said that is not in favor anymore because of why? I'm not sure.
Yes, so actually the Asperger's diagnosis was done away with in 2013. It is no longer considered a valid diagnosis. Everything was combined under one umbrella label now. So we used to have pervasive developmental disorder, we used to have Asperger's, and several other things that were all separate diagnoses. And now that has all been combined into one diagnostic criteria, and it's all considered autism spectrum disorder.
Okay.
And then there's a level system. So
level 1, 2, and 3.
yes, so level 1 means the person probably will need some support. Level 2, a moderate level of support, and level 3 is a pretty significant level of support. Those are folks who probably need a caregiver most of the time.
Mm-hmm. And in a later episode, we'll be talking about the caregiving aspects.
Yeah.
But okay, go ahead, Ralph.
Well, I was going to say that, on just as you think about that, that essentially is going backwards. You would think that the most serious would be level 1, and the least involved in support would be level 3, but it goes the other way because what we're saying is 3 is the biggest number. So 3 is the most serious.
It's like categories of hurricanes, Ralph.
Yeah.
Category 5 is a big one. Category 4 is a real big one. 1, not so much, right?
Yeah.
Now, it wasn't just the president that is drawing attention to autism. Here's the latest APA monitor, and there's a really good article in here about misunderstanding and miscommunicating information about autism. And if you go down to learn more, you'll see in our program notes that there's a link to this article. Now, the interesting thing here is that if you read the article in the monitor, you can't link to it, but there are tons of links in the electronic version of it. So take a look at it, and you'll see more information about autism than you probably will get in a lifetime. Okay. Now, Bridget, how is autism? What's the effect of autism on an individual? The president was talking about how awful it was. Is it that awful, or are we stigmatizing people?
Personally, I don't think it's awful. I think it's a natural variation in just human presentation for the most part. There certainly are people whose maybe sensory challenges or if they have a co-occurring intellectual disorder or things like that that could truly limit their quality of life. And I don't mean to downplay that or those folks who may need that level of support. But primarily, autism is a social disorder, And the main challenges or negative downsides are created by an unaccepting society that doesn't provide people with autism access to the same things that the rest of society has.
Okay. Now, a lot of people are, at least I've seen, are kind of self-diagnosing. They're going onto TikTok and they're getting information about autism, and then they're saying, "Well, I'm on the spectrum." Is there what would be the word, Ralph? Um, a certain pride to being considering yourself autistic?
I don't know. Maybe there is. I mean, for people who 40 years ago were closeted very deliberately, we now have Gay Pride Month. There might be something that's coming to the fore that says, hey, I'm on the spectrum. So, raw me.
Have you noticed that, Bridget?
Yes. So my explanation for that would actually be that with the rise of technology and more ability to communicate, especially via text, which is often an easier way for individuals with autism to communicate because it takes some of the body language aspects out of communication. And that is often one of the things that autistic people have the most difficult time with is interpreting those body language signals. Because there's a statistic out there that about 70% of what we're actually communicating when we're in person with other humans is communicated non-verbally.
Oh, I'd say it was even higher than that, maybe 90%. But
Yeah,
Yeah.
and so if you're an autistic person who doesn't necessarily catch the vast majority of those non-verbal cues, you have a pretty hard time communicating with people, right?
mm-hmm.
So now with the rise of like the internet and forums and a lot more text-based communication, autistic individuals are able to connect with one another, especially over a much wider geographical area.
Okay.
And so there is a rise in like an autistic community coming together. Also, it's a relatively new diagnosis, right? We talked about the first diagnosis being in the 40s.
Mm-hmm.
So we're just now getting into the stage where there are a lot of adults who are diagnosed with autism or have self-identified with autism, as you brought up, who are connecting with other individuals who are either diagnosed or self-identifying. And it's creating kind of a community similar to how we saw a lot of the gay pride things starting to come out in the 80s and 90s.
Okay.
And one of the interesting things to me, Bridget, to support that point is I spoke with an autistic student at one point about why he really liked to text on his phone. And he said, I like it because it stays flat.
Yep.
And, when you think about it, I mean, the words are there, the words, but you don't have to worry about the smiles or the nods or the turning away or whatever. That's body language. You can just say the words are there. They stay flat.
Okay. Well,
You know,
Yeah, and I think it's important to note that in textual communication is one of the only times that autistic individuals actually have access to communication that works for them, right? The vast majority of the time, the neurotypical community, the majority of folks, are expecting the autistic person to learn how to speak neurotypical, if you will, to interpret all of these cues and everything. And that's a tremendous strain that can be very exhausting for autistic individuals to have to constantly go against their brain wiring to try to like run everything through these filters to interpret what's going on around them to avoid social ostracization because of their misunderstandings.
Yeah. You mentioned, brain waves, and I've seen a couple studies that indicate that there are probably at least 4 different brain patterns that go along with autism. The non-neurologically typical brain, might be working over here or working over here or working back there. And maybe we're not dealing with one disorder, maybe we're dealing with a whole lot of them.
Yeah, I do think the future of autism will probably have some different subtypes developed, as we've seen with some of the diagnoses that have been around a little bit longer and have been divided into subtypes. And I do think that will be probably helpful for folks because now we're kind of in this area where everything's being lumped under one diagnosis and it's almost so broad that it's difficult for people to connect with one another.
Okay, let's get back to the press conference or the announcement earlier this week. President Trump was saying, there are some countries where they just don't have Tylenol, and those countries probably don't have autism. Well, I think that's probably incorrect.
I would suggest that a country that doesn't have autism or doesn't have Tylenol also probably doesn't have a very good mental health support system or a very good process for identifying and diagnosing individuals with autism.
Yeah. So down under Learn More, you can get to a couple of studies where autism is looked at around the world. Every place has autism, has Sweden, Denmark, Britain, Scotland. We didn't see much of it in Africa, did we, Bridget?
No.
And that's why people were being kept in closets, right? Okay. Yeah. So I guess we're seeing better diagnoses. One of the very short, and I indicated it's a short clip on autism by this fellow who's really pretty interesting guy. His hair out to here, and but he talked about environmental toxins, like poisons in the air. So I wonder if a place like L.A. that has a lot of smog and fog, or Ralph, you were in China, which you said you didn't see the sun for days there.
Yeah.
What's the incidence in China? Any idea?
Well, it seems very much to be like we were back in, say, the late 40s, early 50s. People who probably in North America would be diagnosed are treated, I don't want to say badly, but they are
I think I could say treated badly.
shunned.
Yeah.
They're, one of the terms that Bridget used in the introduction was ADHD. When your dad and I were kids in the 50s, we had three kinds of kids: normal kids, bad kids, and dumb kids.
And we were in the bad, dumb category, right?
We were. And the thing is that, today we have ADHD, we have autism, we have kids with behavioral disturbances, blah, blah, blah. We have much better tools to identify and hopefully work with. But back in the day, we just said, he's a bad kid.
Yeah.
Believe me, I know.
Yes, so that brings us to a great point, because I did want to address there is a significant rise in the number of people being diagnosed with autism, right? And that's kind of what's leading to this idea that we have an autism epidemic on our hands.
Right. Okay. Yeah. In the car coming over, we talked a little bit about epidemic, so you can fill us in on what an epidemic is.
Yes. So first, let's just look at what epidemic even is defined as.
You're looking at your cell phone, aren't you?
I am, for the dictionary definition here, just because I
Okay.
think precise understanding of words is important.
There's my cell phone again. Okay.
So, an epidemic is a widespread occurrence of an infectious disease in a community at a particular time.
Okay.
So, looking at just that definition, autism is not infectious, it's not contagious. You will not get autism from hanging out with other people who have autism.
You don't get autism from the swimming pool.
No,
Okay.
absolutely not. So, autism by definition cannot be an epidemic.
Okay.
So, if we don't have an epidemic on our hands, it's not the vaccines, it's not the Tylenol. What is it, right? Why do we have this significant uptick in diagnoses of autism? And there's actually quite a few very reasonable reasons for that. One of them we touched on a little bit earlier, and that is that when the DSM-5 came out in 2013, there were a lot of changes to the diagnostic criteria. One of those things that I'd already kind of touched on is that we used to have 3 separate diagnoses. We used to
Yeah.
have Asperger's, pervasive developmental disorder, and autism. Those are all just called autism now.
Okay.
So that is contributing to higher rates of diagnosed autism if everyone who had an Asperger's and a perversive developmental diagnosis previously now has an autism diagnosis.
Okay. And let's just talk about DSM for a second. We've done this in the past, but DSM-1 was about 30 pages long. And then 2 was a little bit longer, 3 was a little bit thicker. Now DSM-5 is about 500 pages long, and it requires a DSM handbook to understand the DSM book. So, the criteria is really spelled out in there. So we're seeing more and more, and I guess in some ways it's good because it's an acceptance of the fact that there are neurotypical people, out there. They're not just bad, stupid, or what was the other category that we didn't? Good?
Normal.
Normal.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, we don't think anybody's normal, do we?
Nobody's normal.
Yeah, okay. So let's go back then to,
Yeah.
So we got a lot more diagnoses out
So
there.
another change that happened with the DSM-5 in 2013, previously ADHD and autism were diagnoses of exclusion. You could not be diagnosed with both of them at the same time.
Oh,
And current research now shows that approximately 50 to 70% of people with autism also have ADHD. And there is no specific medications for autism, but there is for ADHD.
okay.
So the thought here is that a lot of people who probably met criteria for both in the past were being diagnosed with only the ADHD to get access to some ADHD medications that they might have needed. And since that then excluded the autism diagnosis, they were not diagnosed with autism. But now, since 2013, we've learned that both can exist in the same individual. So a lot of those people are now getting that additional diagnosis of autism added with their ADHD diagnosis.
But there's nothing, you can have certain medications for ADHD, but nothing really works for autism, does it?
Not specifically, no. There's a lot of things that treat some of the secondary issues that
Yeah.
come with autism.
Like
due
anxiety
to,
and stuff.
Right, due to society's unacceptance of integrating people with autism. Often that creates some depression or anxiety or different things like that, mostly from social isolation or inability to achieve goals and access resources.
Social isolation. Any idea what the COVID lockdown has done for the incidents? It's a speculation. I have no idea.
I don't actually know either. I have not seen specific research on the effect of the pandemic on autism.
Yeah, I think if
The one thing that we can pretty much categorically say is that countries which did not lock down schools during COVID have better functioning young people today than North America does, because the social isolation of being at home rather than at school affected North American kids differently than what other countries, like Denmark, for example, which didn't shut its schools down. So kids who were 7 in Denmark in 2020, 2019, are now better functioning 13-year-olds,
Absolutely. We are seeing a lot of social deficits from kids being at home during lockdown. And I do wonder that kind of makes me think of, this part is kind of purely speculation on my part. I'm not quoting any research or anything here. But it brings me to the idea of masking, right? So kids with autism might be in school. They're seeing what their peers are doing. They're watching their peers get rewarded for things, or they're having experiences of getting reprimanded maybe for some of their autistic traits coming out. And then the idea there is that they then learn to copy the kids around them who are not getting in trouble or who are getting rewards even for their behaviors. And they learn to essentially cover up a lot of their autistic traits. And I'm wondering if during lockdowns, during the pandemic, kids didn't have as much access to their typically developing peers. And then they didn't learn how to do this masking as much. So maybe we're seeing more identifiable cases of autism because that's not happening.
So that might be part of we're having an epidemic because kids didn't learn how to mask autistic behavior by imitating kids who didn't have autism.
Yeah, I think it's far too recent to have any definitive answers about that, but it certainly is a plausible theory.
Okay. Alex, how long have we been at our show today?
25 minutes.
Okay. I think we've covered a lot of stuff at the kind of introductory level, but we want to go back and talk a little bit more about diagnosis and just how you do this. So, Ms. Eagleson, are you available to do another episode next week?
I think I could probably do that.
Okay. So, Alex, if you take us out.
Here you go.
Until next time, this is Jim
And Ralph.
and Ms. Eagleson saying, keep your stick on the ice, because we're all in this together.